Listeners of the Randomness of Nothing podcast, it's your host, Rashad Woods. And with a special guest today, I'm very honored with the opportunity to be able to talk to an author, former athlete, and with a really acclaimed series that you're going to want to hear more about. This is Leonard Costner, Leonard Costner, that does the Legacy series. And this is a heck of a series. I'm looking forward for my copy of his book coming in the mail. How you doing, sir? Thank you for being on the show.
Hey, I'm doing well, Rashad. I appreciate you having me. I'm excited to talk to you. Heard great things about the show, listened to a couple of samples, so I'm looking forward to our chat.
I'm pumped. I've always this had a special place for me because I'm such a big fan of creativity. When you mentioned one of your inspirations was Spartacus, and I automatically started thinking of obviously that legendary film with Kirk Douglas, and I think of Gladiator and all those wonderful Ridley Scott movies and all the epic films that came up with Charlton Heston growing up. So tell us about your inspiration from writing and really how you came up with this concept.
So my writing process is a little bit different than everybody else's. Most people will come up with an idea, say, hey, I want to be a writer, I want to write the story. Mm-hmm. For me, my whole story and series stem from ego death and from just a dream that I had. So in a previous life, I was an athlete. I played high-level basketball. I was NBA draft prospect, and my senior year of college, my leg disconnected. So I had to have my leg reattached and my pelvis reconstructed. And that was a 2-year recovery. And after post-surgery, for 30 nights in a row, I had the same exact dream. And the same dream reoccurred every night, verbatim, and I ended up jotting that down. Now, mind you, I'm going through ego death at this point because, 2-year recovery, the ortho was telling me that, hey, you'll never be able to play basketball again. But that was my identity that, I had sacrificed for so long for, bled for,
Yeah, for sure. And it was ripped away from you. It was just taken away from you.
It ripped away. It's a life that was ripped away, and you had to mourn that life. Even at that point, I'm not thinking anything of it because that's the only identity that I know.
Right.
But ended up jotting down this dream that I was having, and it turned into my first book.
Beautiful.
And I wasn't a writer. I was a graphic art major. And I approached it in a way that felt familiar to me. So I decided to write as a different medium, as opposed to using like pencil or watercolor or acrylic, something like that. I decided to use words as a different medium for what I knew, the language I knew how to speak. And people tell me that this book in this series is the closest thing that they have to watching a movie.
I've always, I think sometimes, especially in this era where there's so many visuals that are available to people, I say this respectfully, something has to grasp people immediately because they immediately want to see something. It's like, they say the old saying, you have to catch somebody's attention 2 seconds now on social media before it goes. So when you can visualize something reading and it takes you to that place, there's something special about that, right? Because if you look at the old novels of, Princess of Mars and the first sci-fi space opera kind of book, right? That's before George Lucas, people who are listening. There was something before Star Wars, right? And then you start visualizing these places and you're like, wow. And it takes you to places that you never imagined. Did you have a previous background in writing anything as a kid? I know you said you were a graphic arts major, but did it just come out organically while you were, compartmentalizing such a devastating loss?
So I, like all people do, tried, jotting down poems, things like that. Mm-hmm. But, just in terms of writing, it wasn't ever anything that I kind of focused on, Right. For me, it's all, my dad was a professional basketball player. I was born into that life. I grew up, I was raised in Europe, watching him play, and he never told me how to be a basketball player. That's just what I knew. Exactly. Yeah. So, when I decided to start writing it, something interesting happened, and it kind of probably plays into something that developed further more recently. But for me, words have colors, and each word is it has a different coinciding color. That's so beautiful. As I'm writing, I kind of tell people I apologize if you're expecting J.K. Rowling or George R.R. Martin or James Patterson. That's not me. If this is going to be a different read than what you might be used to, but for me, words have colors, and as I'm writing,
Mhm.
the colors have to match, or they have to coincide with,
Beautiful.
I see I have synesthesia. So I perceive all my books as oil paintings.
Okay.
So as I'm writing,
Yeah.
the color it turns into a brushstroke, and
Yes. It has to
it's
flow and everything. There's no
it has
empty
to flow.
words, right? There's no empty.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Because it's weird. Like I don't know what music you listen to, but you know how there's the filler songs on the
Yep.
albums, right? And you're
Yep.
like, okay, man. So you try to take away like they have to make sure that they met the album, the contractual agreement of 12,
Exactly.
of the album. So they got 4 songs that you just like skip,
Yeah,
skip.
skip. No skips. You don't want skips,
We've all been there, right?
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
that's funny. I figured I'd throw that little jab in there. So tell us about the details of the book, Legacy. Luke Hart. I really want to make sure we talk about the plot of it without giving too much away at the same time.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So the story follows a young man named Luke Hart who goes off to college. He's an army brat. He ends up getting into trouble while he's over in Europe and has to come back to the States. And when he's back in America, he ends up going to college and discovering that he is the spiritual reincarnation of Spartacus.
Wow.
So he ends up being pulled into this clandestine society called Legacy that's been thriving since the decline of the Roman Empire, created by Emperor Numerian before his assassination. This institution really thrives in the shadows, and you come to find out that Legacy is where the world turns. The handshakes, the bets, the things that happen within this bubble.
Yeah.
Right? Sounds
For
familiar,
sure.
right?
Of course, yeah.
The things that happen within this bubble that, it's ancient style of combat, but also seen as barbaric in some cases.
Right.
But it takes place within this glass sphere that only the wealthy elites have access to. And as Luke goes on, he realizes that his being here isn't coincidental. It's not something that he happened to stumble onto.
Beautiful.
It's more of a preordained destiny that he has to fulfill, not because of some sort of spiritual or godlike
it's a lineage situation.
Plan. It's a lineage situation.
It's a lineage.
Exactly. He's there because of a blood feud by the descendant of the man who was commissioned to kill Spartacus.
Yeah. You know what's great about those things is like, I already see the movie playing out in my head, right? And what's interesting is that, I'm a big like Highlander. And even though like Spartacus I'm a huge, and I immediately started thinking of like Highlander, like the Clan MacLeod. They're making a brand new remake of it, obviously with Henry Cavill. I'm really excited because it's the director of John Wick, right? So you're like, if it was anybody else, I'd be kind of like,
I thought Carl Urban did a good job.
Yeah, but it's I'm looking forward to the opportunity to see that film, right? Because I'm thinking like, I love those. There's something about, ancient history and its correlation to modern history, right? Even when you talk about the gladiator spectacles and you're talking about the barbaricism, right? You have the old Greek style of pancration, right? Which was boxing, wrestling, and striking at the same time. And that's modern day MMA, right? So all that did was just evolve over the course of time to eventually, we're not too dissimilar from what entertained us back then versus what entertains us now.
Absolutely not. And I think, because there is this idea of class and barbarism and, we try to separate ourselves from, people of ancient time because we're so much more enlightened. We wear pants.
We don't do that stuff anymore, right? Yeah.
We don't do those kind of things.
Yeah.
I think what a lot of people will tap into and what we see from like, films like Gladiator and Spartacus on Stars and things like that is that people are still drawn to these forms of combat where if you're deciding your fate between another person's,
without question,
you have to do that. You have to be able to make that choice up close and personal and not from a distance,
right.
Not with, weapons of mass destruction or with guns, they're not for nothing. They're lame
Right.
forms of killing. Like, oh yeah, wow, you're a big tough guy. You can shoot somebody from a mile away. Like, if you want to take somebody's life, and that's kind of what the whole premise is. It's like Luke he quickly learns that his
Right.
means of survival
Right.
is an obligation rather
Right.
than left up to chance.
I think one of the fascinating parts too is him. He's a college student, he's a regular person, and he has to navigate this suddenly, life altering moment. And then there's that question of, man, I don't know if does it transport him in time, or does it modernize itself? I don't, like I said, I'm really interested in reading the book, but does it is there some, I don't want to say time travel, but does it allow for him to have periods in that time period, or people transport or anything like that?
That's actually a great question. So there isn't any time travel in that regard, right? It's more of a lived human
Okay.
foundation rather than where
He has to
time
right a
traveling.
wrong from a different, yeah.
Exactly. It's genetic memory. It's, him tapping into this energy.
Right.
Energy can't be created or destroyed, only transferred. It's him tapping into this energy. And there's all these, accounts that we see of people being able to speak to or have these, extrasensory, perceptions. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the basis of what he is. He's an echo. So in
Yeah.
Legacy, all the fighters who grace the sand are called bloodborns,
Yeah.
and there's a hierarchy to bloodborn, being that some bloodborn have a stronger connection to their origins.
That's
So
nice.
Luke's origin is Spartacus,
Yeah.
and he's an echo because he's essentially the reincarnation of Spartacus.
Yeah.
So he has the ability to tap into his genetic memory,
Yeah.
as well as Spartacus's memories. So
Right.
he's showing him things that
Yes.
took place
Yeah.
before,
Right.
and he can kind of rewrite history because history always repeats itself, right?
Of course. Of
So
course.
Luke taps into this side of him, and really this is a different protagonist than you might see anywhere else, because it's not him either saying, hey, I'm too powerful, I don't want to be this person, or trying to deny his abilities, or having a hard time coping with, oh, I'm such and such. He's an army brat. He studied martial arts.
Of
He
course.
has an inclination for combat, and
Right.
now the only thing that he isn't able to do is fight with a sword, because that's not something that you would have
Yeah.
trained with.
Correct. Right. Those are the times
So
that I need some updated skill sets, so to speak, when it comes to
exactly, it's a more of a Carl Jung study on integrating ego, where he has to become more versed at being just as capable of evil as he is of good.
That's
And
beautiful.
the more he becomes heroic, the darker he actually gets.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because some of the most acclaimed people in history that we kind of just say, oh, and I'm not here to judge history in that regard, but there's a lot of bodies that they left behind for what they did. We can talk about this for multitudes of times, but it's the scourge of what they left behind. Ultimately, the victor gets to tell their stories, right? And so they get the statues built.
His story, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and so they get the statues built after them, and it looked like they, conquered the quote unquote savages. And there's a lot of brutality behind it, But again, that's how history kind of, ultimately tells itself. Now, how many books have been written so far?
7.
I thought I saw 7, and so
7 books. Yeah, the first one. So it's funny. The first book was written in 2011, 2012. I published it, and then I actually, for some reason, end up writing in 2s. Yeah. So the second and third books I wrote at the same time, and completed both of those in 3 months. And then I wrote 4 and 5 at the same time as well. And then 6, I actually finished after 7, because 7 is 3 times as long as my longest book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you, when you're writing, do you feel as like, do you get writer's block? Is that a cliche, or is it really difficult? Like you're writing particularly about the same character, or do you find it that there's still more to tell about this particular character? There's still more along the way. Like, how does that work when you're so in depth with this particular character?
So it's actually interesting. So I do get writer's block, but not in terms of not knowing what to say. It's more of I have too much coming in.
Yeah.
So for me, the story is all transmission, right? I'm receiving, I'm essentially been channeling this entire story since that whole ego death experience. And I don't plot anything out.
Beautiful.
Whenever I start writing, I just start writing, and then when I'm done, I'm done. So I'm receiving story, and it's being told to me, and I'll get a block if there's too much that I have to say, and I'm like, all right, hold on, let me figure out what this is, what this means, because I can't have all this stuff, and it might be multiple things from different points of the story at the same time.
Okay. Do you now you looks like you also have, like, I don't want to obviously let any genies out of the bottle, but how is it going as far as from being a writer to potentially getting this adapted?
It is. So I think, and I said this on another podcast a couple of weeks ago. If you're trying to decide on where you want to go with whatever you're doing, especially with writing, there's a certain point where you kind of need to start tailoring, what you're writing and the avenues you're pursuing in order to get there, right? A lot of us, we don't have unlimited means of resources to just throw money at things.
Of course.
So if you want to be like with a traditional publisher or something like that, like you have to go down those steps. If you see it as being more visual or an audio book, like you can start tailoring how you want to do that. And now with all the different amenities available to us, like we can be our own publishers.
Absolutely.
I actually ended up creating my own publishing company for this after I had a deal with a traditional publisher, and that fell through. I didn't decide to pursue it any further, and was like, hey, I have the experience business wise, as well as creativity and design, in order to do this myself. Let me just do this myself. And at that point, it's like you got to keep pushing. So I've always seen this and experienced this as a visual story, and that's how I need to communicate it. Right now it's only I'm only able to do that through writing, and I need to keep telling the story different ways for different people. But in terms of getting to the point of adapting, you're not going to get there if you don't put yourself an opportunity to figure out what that is. That also goes to accepting or rejecting opportunities. So if you don't put yourself in that position, you're never going to get there. Spoiler alert, I actually am in a position now where we just we're in a production and development deal with a company out of Hollywood. They've been attached to some pretty big names like Men in Black, Black Hawk Down,
that's amazing.
Kill Bill.
It's amazing.
It's awesome, right? But I've also, prior to this, when we got the idea of let's just commit to the idea of trying to adapt into a film, I had to go down and put myself in opportunities to find out what's not right, who I can't trust, and that's what you gotta learn those things,
and nobody's gonna. And the funny part is there's no like manual of how to teach you that, right? No. Like you can't tap like a friend on the shoulder and be like, hey man, what you're in uncharted territory, you know what I mean? Like this is your baby. You gotta figure it out.
Exactly. It's like, hey, I know somebody who does some type of, short story film. Like let me talk to them. They got some sort of experience. I know somebody else who does documentaries. You got to start, doing all this, and you also got to, fall into the predators. So like, hey, these things aren't things that I'm comfortable with. You know what I'm saying? Man.
For sure. And what I love what you said earlier too, when you said you created your own publishing company, right? So like, I do my own podcast, right? So the barriers have been removed. There's a director who just back rooms, back doors. The kid's 21 years. Yeah, 21 years old, and just like had the box office leading film. And now and then even in the 90s, you had the Hughes brothers, right? So who did Menace to Society, John Singleton.
Yep.
The barriers of entry to be in media, writing, podcasting, making your own films, the costs have come down, the barriers have come down. You don't have to wait for that gatekeeper anymore. Like if you want to put music out, you're like, oh man, normally I would have had to send my demo. Now you can sit back and say, go on YouTube or SoundCloud and really cultivate your own audience. So for people who are writing or listening or want to be creative, this is the best time to do it. It really, truly is.
Absolutely. With, like Amazon allows you to publish your own stories. There's a bunch of other different, landing pages and websites that let you go in there and do that.
Yeah. Yep.
Really, it comes down to do you have the commitment in order to really see it through,
Yep.
as well as know your strong suits?
Without
If
question.
if it's fine to not be strong at everything, but that's why
Absolutely
you
is.
gotta be able to build a team. You know what I'm saying? You gotta be able to build a team
Yeah.
and have somebody, people that you can trust, that can, let you focus on. If you're just a creative person, just be a
Right.
creative person.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, right? Because I do the podcast, right, and I'm terrible at social media, so you have to, or
Oh my God,
promote,
I am
or
too.
right, or promoting things, right? Because you're sitting back and saying, "I'm," to your point, you're good at one thing or competent in one thing, and you feel comfortable doing another thing. Now you have to actually put it out there. Have you done like book tours, signings, and like to get the really like the PR work and everything going on right now?
So I this is actually pretty funny too. I didn't actually start openly publicizing the book until 2023.
And you wrote your first
And
one in 2012, and you didn't start.
wrote
That
the
is
first one.
nuts.
Yeah. So what it came down to is that experience. We talked about experiences. I had an experience with the first book that I paid somebody who was an editor slash
Yeah.
in the publishing world for years, decades,
Mm-hmm.
and he actually essentially stole money from me,
Yeah,
tried to
that's really
change my manuscript because he thought it would be better, although he didn't realize that there was more stories,
right.
and there was all these different typos. So I was embarrassed
That's
of the first
unfortunate.
book. And if people read
Solid.
it, it's not me. I'm not saying, "Hey, I wrote a book." Like, that's not who I am, right?
Right.
So I eventually got comfortable with being able to do it myself, and I sent it to the other publisher, and we had the deal. And I was like, all right, you know what? Let me just give it a full commitment to it. All these new, just could be timing. All these new, applications came out that allowed me to put out a better product.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2023, met Ross,
Yeah.
and he, put some air under my sails, and he started talking, and then I decided to do a test run with Daily Dose Media.
Yeah.
I used to be the largest social media marketing company in the world,
Okay.
and spent a few $1,000s, me and my partners, and had way more success in that 30 to 60 days that we did this run with them than I even imagined.
Beautiful.
So that's kind of how I got to the ability to be in a position to talk to these movie folks, these producers.
Yeah.
Just because at that point I had data, I had
Yeah.
a full IP, a full
Yes.
universe built out, but it was just all timing.
It's funny you mentioned that, because for people who are listening, like, you always ask, how can you get in that room? That's like that. Like, everybody wants to get in that room, but what you also
Yeah.
have to realize too is, like, most of us don't have an uncle, a friend, the
Nope.
person that's going to get you in that space. So, like, and I say this respectfully, and you'll know this, you get in that space by creating something for people wanting to hear, see, taste, or touch, right? You're like, okay, I can't get through there by a phone call, but I host a podcast. So then I can get access to people that I couldn't normally get access to. You have a book, people who want to create, you have to have a product. This is a show me world, right? So I can show you I have a podcast. You can show you have a book. There's people, they get inundated with ideas all the time to try to adapt films. But the beauty about it is that's their job, is to seek out mediums to adapt. You just have to be prepared when that phone call or conversation takes place.
Exactly. You got to keep going. You can't let that one no,
Oh man.
for me, I let the one no, derail me for several years. Now, I didn't stop working because I kept
Mm-hmm.
writing. Ended up writing 5 books by the time, 2023 came around.
Right.
So I had a whole universe built out, but you gotta keep going. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
opportunities aren't going to just manifest. And if
Absolutely not.
J.K. Rowling talked about sending out like 300 query letters. Really, I mean, it's not because she's a terrible writer. Obviously, it's because in that world, you either have to be somebody
Yeah. Yep.
knows,
Yep.
or somebody famous, because nobody wants to sell a product of somebody that they don't know.
Hey, listen, it wasn't until I started putting myself and then making this podcast. I'm talking to you because I put myself out there, right?
Absolutely.
And it's like you're getting these good, positive things happening. And obviously your book is important, but it's really the theme of life.
Mhm.
waiting on for an opportunity, sitting on your couch while walking back and forth to the fridge. I don't care what you're trying to accomplish. It's you're not going to get it, and you have to be willing to deal with rejection. And to your point, now that they have screening softwares and they have all these things, you can't let that deter you from putting out your material, because
Absolutely.
what the publisher or the editor wants to see, how many movie deals or books have been passed by people and then turned into monstrous hits because the person couldn't understand what was in front of them.
Exactly. And again, it's, for me, I keep putting out more content having to do with book one, because I got to keep telling the story, because there's what, 8 billion people in the world. All 8
Yes.
billion aren't gonna be able to learn in the same way. And
Right.
for me, until I get to a point where it's, churning all by itself, like we're doing a good job now, but until it's churning all by itself,
Right.
I got to keep telling the story. The work doesn't stop.
Right. It's like, it's like UFC is synonymous with MMA. Until you get to where you're Kleenex, or until you get to where you're Stephen King, kind of level, everybody had to hustle and work. I remember, and I was watching old episodes of Columbo one time on Peacock.
Okay.
And then I saw the first one of the episodes was directed by Steven Spielberg, and it was like 72. And I was like, whoa. I was like, I had to do a double take when I saw the end credits. I'm like, are you kidding me? So here's the most famous director in the world, had to still cut his teeth, making a Columbo episode, making Duel, right? You hear the story of Robert Rodriguez, when he made El Mariachi, and he's donating his body to science, and he's doing this low budget film for 10 grand. Like, you may have to kind of be a little embarrassed, like, hey man, this is my first product, but it was something. And then people will applaud you for hey man, you really did that on your own under these conditions, working full time, balancing family, with the right backing, you can take this to the next level.
Absolutely. And, for a lot of folks, especially, in business, the difference between an entrepreneur and a small business owner, the small business owner has just found consistent success.
Right.
Like, there's no difference. It's just one, it's a small it's one person or a small team.
Yep.
And until you can get to that consistent success, you're just an entrepreneur. So just keep going. There's nothing wrong with it.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And, I'm really looking forward to that book coming in the mail. I love the fact that it's a 7-part series. To me, I say this, kind of biasly. I hope they don't chop it into a movie where they take 7 books and put it in, try to make it into one movie. I hope that it's a mini series. And I really do, because you'll be like, dang, man.
So luckily, I do have some input in that.
Okay.
We also have a graphic novel is coming out too. Mm-hmm. So I'll get you a copy of that. But they're gonna debut it. They're debuting it at Comic-Con.
That is awesome, man.
Yeah, we Outland and Platinum Studios. Platinum Studios are doing it. They're gonna publish it, with Diamond Classics. So that's awesome. That history right there.
Yeah.
And then we got a pretty dope name attached to the screenplay. He's writing it. He's also involved with the graphic novel as well. He's an acclaimed writer. He I don't know if I can give his name away.
Let's not do that. Let's not do that.
Some of his graphic novel has been adapted into films. He's written a bunch for Marvel and DC. Yeah. So this is pretty cool. I'm definitely gonna get you a copy of that graphic novel for sure.
And what's most amazing is that when you're holed up in the hospital bed and you're doing rehab, here you are, years later, over a decade. And that's one thing people also have to understand, is that you're a 10-year success overnight in the making. People only see the production deal, or you at the film premiere or the TV premiere or wherever you're going to be having your big, event, and you let out that sigh of relief, like, damn. They didn't see when you were in the hospital bed, with your dreams dashed, wondering what's next in life. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And, not for nothing. I saw it myself as a film, and you got to believe in yourself first, because nobody else is going to believe you. Nobody else is going to believe in you. So you have to believe in yourself first and be able to convince other people to believe in you as well.
You're not, man. Listen, I have a podcast that actually like has going some traction, and all I started. If you look at my first episode, it's like embarrassing. I'm like in my basement with this little tarp background, like, and then next, I got a PR rep in Los Angeles. I'm going to a national social media awards event. I got a photo shoot in Beverly Hills coming up, and it's just, to your point, you're like, all I had to do was get out of my own head and say, you know what, to heck with it. I'm just going to see what happens.
Exactly. You start from one point, you get one listener. One listener means 10 means 100, and that just keeps compounding. Yep. So, for me, I got, very hardcore fan base.
Beautiful,
with some folks. And, although I may not understand why, like the fact that they ride for me so hard means that I am obligated now to continue to tell this story and to take it as far as I can.
It's the same thing with me, right? You're like, when people start referring their clients to you, you're like, oh, snap, I better be on point. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you take that serious because you realize, like, when PR reps are saying, hey, I got my client on, wanting to come on, that means that they don't know you from Tom, Dick, or Jane. They're just trusting what they heard. So I can't bomb or have a horrible experience with you or their client, because you're like, hey man, then that leads to a bigger client. And I'm not saying that to you in a negative way, but you have no idea who's listening at any given Sunday.
Exactly. Everything is viewed from an outside lens. No, like you said, nobody saw the hardships. They only see the overnight success. And no disrespect to anybody else, but we only can perceive the world through our eyes.
Exactly.
So we have to keep putting out great content. We got to keep putting out image of somebody that other people want to know who they are.
Without question. You're right. And the thing is about it is, at the end of the day, there's a lot of underserved audiences that are craving for that type of opportunity, right? And so, I think we could have a part 2. I'd love to see more. I can't wait to talk about the book. Like I said, I can't wait to see you up in the stars where you need to be. And, we're connected because when you start, you realize that when you see that there's it's like a weird feeling, because you're like, am I really actually like somewhat like doing this? Right.
Yep.
It's a weird thing because you still have to pinch yourself.
But we gotta have a part 2. I appreciate you having me. I'm told something's gonna happen. Q3, Q4, we'll know for a fact where this is gonna be.
Of course.
So we'll have a with the film. I mean.
Yeah, man. So, oh, okay. Well, listen, man. I would love to interview you at the premiere at some point when it.
Absolutely. When it definitely gonna do that. We're definitely gonna do that.
Where can people find J. Leonard Costner?
So you can actually, if you want to just Google J. Leonard Costner, a bunch of SEO comes up. You'll see conversations. You'll be able to find the books. You can go to thelegacyverse.com if you want to see the website. Get some more background on the universe of Legacy itself. Instagram at thelegacyxii. There's a bunch of content in there. I do a bunch of like VO3 renderings and be able to tell a story visually that way.
Beautiful.
If people want to kind of get an idea of what it might look like as a film or have some sort of visual reference to the characters. Again, it's just I'm constantly telling the story. The work doesn't stop, and even after we premiere our first film, that night is going to be to the end credits, and then what's next? Can I just
add a little caveat before we go? And this is just me, like, already being a future fan. The first movie is usually great, and then they rush the second film to get like to piggyback off the first one. And 9 times out of 10, the second one's never as good, right? So like, I'm not saying for every Terminator 2, right? There's a litany, right? There's a litany of other films, that we don't need to discuss of what happened. They just greenlit that.
I mean, maybe Harry Potter might have the only series franchise where the films got maybe better, But I mean, we got too many Fast and Furious already.
Don't even get me started on that, man. Like when the first one came out, right? It's like, okay, cool. This is a nice little racing film, and then when they started going into space and stuff, I was like, okay, I'm gonna exit over here. Or when the guys could they suddenly got like mutant superpowers and they could they could break like concrete on the. And I'm not hating, like it makes money, do you?
Of course not.
But it's like, you know what, man? I think, for me, it started getting a little too absurd. Right.
Exactly. I mean, I'm still going to watch because I'm invested. I'm invested now. I've been with these folks for I don't know how long they've been doing it.
25, 26 years. The first one came out in 2000. I was a senior in high school. I was a senior in high school when that movie dropped.
What?
Yes, I was a senior.
Yeah, we gotta stick with it now. It's been a staple in our lives, but they're definitely outlandish with what they're doing.
But they kind of are winking at the camera while they're making a buck too, right?
Oh yeah, Vin Diesel knows what he's like. Yeah,
of course.
You don't keep paying tickets.
And you know what? And to your point, but listen, Vin Diesel paid his dues to be able to make movies like this. This dude was a bouncer, in New York City. Just trying to get his name into the film industry. So, we can laugh about it, but, again, to your point, nobody was helping this guy out when he was trying to get his foot into the door. So
absolutely not. Yeah, he's, definitely one of the ones to look at, and, there's so many, pretty much Stan Lee, Stan Lee in terms of, he's like the GOAT in terms of, these, universes, George Lucas, all these folks started from, Spielberg, like you said.
Modest means.
Modest means. They started as just some person trying to break in, and they kept at it.
Exactly. And, and I'm looking forward to seeing your name on billboards, and I'm looking forward to receiving that book. And I've had an absolutely stellar time on the Randomness to Nothing podcast. And like I said, as a fan of fiction and history blended in all as one, I'm really looking forward to seeing the Legacy series.
I appreciate you having me, man. This is absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Yeah. And, I'm not one of the ones who, try to say like, hey, like I'm a black writer or nothing like that. But seeing folks of color, being able to, be in these positions and it's 100%. To me, it means something different to me than it does to my grandmother who, had to go through these things. And I, just quick sidebar, I got published in Amsterdam News, the oldest, black, newspaper in the world. In New York City, and for me, they had Malcolm X. They had all these, names.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Isn't that
to be in the annals of history with that? It's amazing.
It's one of those things where you sit back and say, I'm supposed to be in this room because a lot of people paid, right? I have every time I kind of dismiss my podcast, right, in a way, but then when you see, you're like, I'm supposed to be in this room, right, and you realize that your hard work paid off, and you realize that people paid a heavy price for you to be able to do this. Right? And that you don't have to do certain things or go through certain things to be able to get your voice heard. And you kind of sit back and say, well, damn, I have to be successful at that because the barriers have been removed. Right?
Exactly. This is what they work for. This is what they, fought for. Absolutely. And, we're out here, doing and being what they hoped that the future would be.
Of course. And listen, the beauty about it is that by putting out your own work, you have more control over it too. So hopefully you don't get like the treatment where the people would try to modify things like, no, this is what we agreed upon, and this is what it was successful before you tried to adapt it. Let's not do certain things because I've already been successful and have a built-in audience. So,
Absolutely. Hey, listen, one more thing for your listeners: trademarks, copyrights. You need to protect your IP. If you can do that prior to somebody coming on, you will have more control because nobody can tell you anything with ownership.
Yeah, listen, man, the vultures are real. You know what I mean? So, I always said that, the nerds were the nerds until the venture capitalist guy saw that the nerds made a lot of money, right? Even Comic-Con started in a little banquet hall or something like that, right? And
3-year waiting list now. I can't do that myself.
That's what I'm saying. So, when they found out, oh, you nerds that are playing, Dungeons and Dragons, ha, ha, ha. And then all of a sudden you saw the line of 10,000 people. You're like, wait a minute, there's a there, right?
Exactly.
So, you know what I mean? So, J. Leonard Costner, it's been a pleasure. And like I said,
I appreciate it.
Looking forward to seeing you at the top, brother.
Thank you, sir.